responses, and all of that is fine with us because this is who we are. We are in a debate. We are in a discourse. It is our responsibility to promote consensus around many of the items that are in front of us. And to do so, clearly, we must have from time to time these kinds of exchanges with the media as well as other institutions that have a critical role to play in advancing our project and our mission. So it's a pleasure to be with you, and my colleagues and I, we are looking forward to a robust conversation. We do not wish to have an anemic discourse. We want it to be vigorous, rigorous, and robust. And that way, hopefully, we can get to the bottom of everything that is of concern to you. So, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Professor Beckel. So at this time, do any other members of the commission want to make any remarks? If not, then we can go straight to questions from the press. Okay. All right. So we are now open for questions from the media. We can start in the room and then we can go on then. No? Yeah.
Wherever.
I can pick things off then, if that's okay.
So could you state your name?
Yes,
and where you're from?
It's Craig Simpson at the Daily Telegraph. It's a lot of doom and gloom at the moment, sort of economic news in the UK. There's a fiscal black hole to be filled. How do you get around persuading the British public who are feeling the financial strain that their taxpayers' money should ultimately help economic development in places that they may never have visited, they may not know the history, the connections? How do you face that challenge of persuading the British public, I suppose?
If I may, well, we are all aware, those of us who have looked at the history of the British people and who understand how the British people oftentimes are divided on important matters such as this one. And we know that within this country, there is a stream of goodwill within the country. We know this, we have seen it in action over the last 300 years. We have seen public opinion making comments about emancipation. Time has come to end slavery. We have heard their views also about apartheid in South Africa. And we know that there was a strong support within this country for these ongoing injustices in our lifetime. But we're also aware that there is some interest groups that have sought to mislead them and to misguide them and to misinform them, and therefore to mobilize or to weaponize the citizenry to support interest ideas or ideas of interest to a minority. So we understand that, so there's no difficulty. But reparatory justice is not about an extraction process. No one from our side is talking about an extraction of wealth from Britain. We have spoken historically about how Britain has extracted wealth from our societies, our communities, our working people. All dimensions of our civilization have been subject to severe extraction of wealth that has helped to build out the institutions of this country and to build up the nation that is Great Britain today. So we are not seeking to offer the same extractive agenda. We are here to say, listen, there are some legacies that have been left behind by British colonization. There's some human suffering that remains in these societies that have endured the extraction from slavery and the oppression of race and civilization. We're here to say, however, going forward, our objective is to develop working partnerships with the British people and their institutions and their government to talk about how we can address these lingering concerns of suffering. How can we do it together? How can we partner? How can we establish mutually supportive strategies so that as we heal this historic wound that remains festering, as we seek to heal it, that we will all emerge healthier as a result of it. Our people, the British people, will all emerge much better from all of this. So we believe that given the goodwill which exists in this country, if there is comprehensive understanding that is deep-rooted, despite the aggression from some quarters, we believe that public opinion will eventually say, well, you know, we've had 300-400 years of extraction of wealth from the Black people in the Caribbean who were enslaved, and the consequences of that out here. Let us sit down and talk about what we can do. I think the British people would be surprised to find that they can also benefit not just psychologically, but they can also benefit spiritually and economically from doing the right thing, which is to come back to the site of the pain and suffering, and with mutual understanding and compassion, develop strategies to alleviate the suffering so that the British people themselves would enter into a period of what we call enlightenment. That, you know, there's something very liberating about doing the right thing. Isn't that true? There's something very, very healing and spiritual about healing pain and removing suffering. There's something about that. That is good for everyone, is it all? So that's where we're heading, and that's what we're hoping for. And we are confident that when the British people hear in more detail directly from us, as opposed to having our presentation filter through the unsupportive elements of the media, that they will come around and say, well, listen, as they did in many other moments in history, no, listen, we've had enough of this. Let us sit and talk about it.
Could I just remind Sir Hilary that when we started this journey on Monday, the 16th of September, 2013, when we all, the CARICOM heads of government, having made the decision in July of 2013 that we were going to advance our reparations campaign, we all subsequently gathered in St. Vincent on the 16th of September and to put the whole thing together. And at that gathering, Sir Hilary sought to identify the journey that we were about to embark upon. And he said that the 21st century was destined to be the century of reparative justice. And that what we were doing was that we were embarking on a journey to transform old relationships between the people of the Caribbean, people of the developing world, people of developed countries, all relationships that were and still are based on persisting patterns of discrimination, of exploitation, of inequity, of injustice. And what we were going to be seeking to do was to lift these old relationships to a new level of justice and equity and understanding and mutual development, because we were conscious that that old world of colonialism, of enslavement, of domination had created economic and social paradigms that are really leading our world to destruction. Whether it is the climate crisis, whether it is the increasing social inequalities within nations and among nations that are producing very, very negative consequences for the world, whether it's the migration crises, It is a crisis of global warming. It is a crisis of many nations in the South struggling under unsustainable debt. The point is that the world needs, Prime Minister Motley says, a reset. And we need, if we are to create a new world environment in which we are going to come to terms with all of the great existential challenges facing us, we can't simply continue on the trajectory that we are on now. So the reparations campaign is really about transforming relations that are dysfunctional, that are leading us to negative consequences, and instead creating a new win-win situation for us all. You know, bringing justice and equity and balance back to our world. And that's how we see it. We see it that we are on a journey of reparative justice. As simple as that.
I have a question, please. Mr. Trisha Duncan from The Guardian. So we've seen this reparations movement obviously growing. It's a global movement now. And the climate change COP conference is currently happening. And I'm aware that there are hundreds of civil rights groups, humanitarians, environmentalists who are saying to COP, we need to put reparations on the agenda as well. And they've obviously made that link between climate change, the resulting impact that we see now, and colonization, the Industrial Revolution. As CARICOM, is that something that, I mean, I know you probably just touched on it, but as a CARICOM Reparations Council, is that something that you're mindful of, that you're thinking about? I know there's a new 10-point plan. I know you can't reveal as yet what's in it, but are those some of the conversations that you had when you were thinking about that update?
Thank you.
Let me just say this. A few years ago, the International Association of Universities, which is a global body comprised of over 300 universities, the International Association of Universities, voted the University of the West Indies to be the lead university on the issue of climate change advocacy. That did not happen without just cause. The University of the West Indies, working with all of the CARICOM governments, have become a leading global agency on climate change. We were talking in our university and doing research on climate change 50 years ago when it wasn't popular. We were the ones who were speaking about our research, rising sea levels, rising sea temperatures. We were talking about these things in the Caribbean for 50 years. On one of our campuses in Barbados, we have an institute for marine research. That was established 40 years ago. To deal with these issues, we were the first whistleblowers on climate temperatures, rising sea levels, the erratic movement of fish, all of these things we were talking about. So when we met in the global environment to discuss this question, when the United Nations asked for the evidentiary basis on the research of CARICOM that came to the surface, our professors were the ones who coined that beautiful jingle, 1.5 to stay alive. Where did that come from? That came out of the Caribbean research, because we have been out there. So yes, we are aware deeply, for obvious reasons. We have built our economies around tourism. We have built our economies around the marine environment. Our people have to survive through the use of fisheries and beaches and so on. So we are most vulnerable. And because we have been, and we know that we have been arguing the case. Now, look at it from the other side, which is the European side. Yes, We know of the Industrial Revolution, we know of the fossil fuels, we know of the carbonization of the environment, we know all of that coming out of the factorization of the production systems of Europe and all of the carbon monoxide. We know all of that because that is now common sense knowledge of history. Yes, it has changed the environment of this planet. And particularly in the Caribbean, we are now exposed to even more aggressive hurricanes than ever before. The intensity of these hurricanes, it's incredible. Let's just look at Melissa. If you have an interest in the Caribbean and you care about the people of the Caribbean, examine what Melissa was all about. This storm entered the Caribbean as just another storm. But the moment it penetrated the archipelago and entered the Caribbean Sea, then it into an ocean environment that is much warmer now than it was 2 or 3 years ago. In fact, the research shows that the Caribbean Sea is 2 to 3 degrees warmer now than it was last year. So we are measuring that, we are experiencing that. And this storm feeding upon this warm body of water called the Caribbean Sea, within a matter of 2 to 3 days, moved from a storm to hurricane 1, 2, 3, 5 hurricane. And what did it do? Landfall on Jamaica. Now, the question is asked, why did it flatten Jamaica the way it did? But look at the history and the geography. The western half of Jamaica is the plantation belt of colonization. The western half of Jamaica, where the sugar plantations, the enslavement, the impoverishment of the emancipated, the landlessness of the people living in little wooden houses as they did during slavery. That western half of Jamaica is the product directly so of colonization and slavery. And that is where the hurricane struck and blew down every structure that it came across. Because what do you have? You have a 19th century world. The eastern part of Jamaica and the central parts of Jamaica are what you might very well call modern Jamaica. That was the part of Jamaica that the Jamaicans people built with independence. They modernized their city, they developed their suburbs, they built wall houses, and through independence on their own, they built a modern country. But the western half has remained 19th century plantation world. And that is the part that has destroyed communities, households, and now we're looking at literally a desert. Now, again, what that does is connect climatology, history, and economics. Now we have thousands of people who are without water, without shelter, and food. All of these things are connected, and we have been speaking about these matters for years. So how can we confront them? We've said constantly, dialogue, discourse, bring the research together, new strategies, new ways of doing things. And the reparations movement has taken that foundation principle that all of these matters can be addressed and discussed and solutions found in a certain kind of framework. That's the vision of CARICOM. We are a commission dealing with justice on behalf of CARICOM, and all of us are absolutely united that we need to have a summit between Britain and its Caribbean colonies to discuss this matter in an orderly fashion.
Chair, Prime Minister Motley would not forgive me if I didn't use this opportunity to refer you to the Bridgetown Initiative. As you know, Prime Minister Motley is the chair of the Prime Ministerial Subcommittee on Reparations. And we have advanced the Bridgetown Initiative as a program to address the interlocking situation of just what Sir Hilary has spoken about. The connection between the debt crisis facing many of our countries, the weakness produced by the debt crisis, the fact that once you have that debt crisis, how then do you muster up the resources to respond to the climate crisis that we did not create, but are on the front line of? Where do you find the resources to plow into making your society more resilient and adapting to the climate crisis? And you know, when we talk about the debt crisis that our countries face, I will give you one example. I mean, there are many ways in which we found ourselves in that debt because of those centuries of enslavement and colonization. But there's a very special way that pertains to Barbados, to Antigua, to St. Kitts, to the British Virgin Islands. Between 1663 and 1838, the British government imposed a tax of 4.5% on every single thing produced in these islands and shipped from these islands. I'm not sure if the British people really recognize this, you know. You know, even during that colonial period, the people of Barbados, and ultimately the burden fell on the backs of the enslaved laboring class, even produced the finances that financed the British governor. That 4.5% tax that was imposed on everything produced in Barbados paid for governors in other British territories, paid annuities, pensions to members of the royal family and members of the aristocracy in Britain. In other words, a lot of the debt situation that our countries find ourselves in is precisely because of those centuries of really siphoning off and plundering our resources. And so the Bridgetown Initiative, which links the two, which says we have to address both. We have to address the economic fragility, the overburdened debt situation, and we have to link that to how we deal with the climate crisis. And so, again, it is about reparative justice. It is summoning the world, look, if we don't, with proper goodwill and understanding that we are all in this together, if we do not address these lingering situations of injustice and fragility, then what happens? The climate crisis only gets worse. Developing countries only suffer more because then they don't have the resources to respond. The climate refugee situation only worsens. So the point is, when we said in 2013, the 21st century must be a century of reparative justice. Yes, we are looking for justice for ourselves, but by seeking justice for ourselves, we are also seeking universal justice. We're also seeking to cure and to heal wounds and inequities and unsustainable situations that if they're permitted to fester, will wreak havoc not only on us, will wreak havoc on our entire world. So I think we want to say to the government and people of the UK, this is the spirit in which the reparations campaign should be viewed. We all have a stake in it. We all have a stake in seeing reparative justice come to the fore and help us to create a more sustainable, a more viable, a more civilized and humane world.
Yes, and I can tell you, our voice in this country has not been as clear as we would like it to be. Thus, when we say to the British people and to the British government that they should be aware of how blessed they are, should be aware of how blessed you are. You lost your American colonies, lost the USA, you lost Canada, you lost Africa, you lost Asia, and the Caribbean were your first colonies. These were your first colonies. This is where you started your colonization. Put Ireland aside for a moment. let us say Ireland might have been the testing ground, but I don't want to go to Ireland at the moment. But we know that the West Indies that's where you started. And from the West Indies, you went to USA and then Canada and Africa and Asia and so on and so forth. This is where you started. This is where your original extraction of value started. So here we are. Since then, there have been many models. The USA, to get away from you, went to war. Okay, revolution. Cuba, get away from the Americans, went to war, revolution. Haiti, the largest slave colony in the Americas, to get away from the French, they went to war. Now, you take all of that history, you bring it down, and you look at where you are now. You went to war with the rest of us helping you to fight the Nazis, right? Caribbean people came up here, put on the British uniform, went to Europe, beat the hell out of Hitler, and free this country. Good. After that, the Americans gave you the Marshall Plan. Marshall Plan put Britain back on its feet. Britain stood up. And the Windrush West Indians came here, hundreds and hundreds, thousands of us came here to help with that. Clean up the place, work in the industries, put Britain back on its feet. Now, that is our history, our joint history. You want a Marshall Plan. Marshall Plan put you back on your feet as a nation. Now, your smallest colonies, that happen to be your oldest colonies, are saying to you, why don't you extend the principles of a Marshall Plan to look at those little colonies in the Caribbean where you started? The little islands, as David has said, that you use fiscal policies and monetary policies to maximize extraction. How can you turn your back on the source of your beginning? Now, it's like parents kicking children out of the house and they're out there struggling and they don't even think about them. That is not a value that exists in this country. People in this country care about those vulnerable persons who are part of their community. They care about them. Now, when the British nation faced the Caribbean, well, as they did in the 1960s, all of our first prime ministers came here to discuss forms of support. What did you leave behind? You left dozens of islands with no resources, bankrupt treasuries, no economic strategies. That's what you left behind. And we got together and we said, well, we have to become independent nations. Our leaders came here. And what did the British government say to them? If you want independence, well, bugger off. You're on your own, not a cent from us. And that was our independence journey. In other words, we have to clean up the mess that you have left in the Caribbean, and we have to clean it up by ourselves. And you don't want to be a part of that. So we said, no, you have to help us clean up this mess that you have created so that we can all go forward together. Now, when I say that, I say, well, we adopted the democracy model which you propose. Now, when some of the poorest people on the planet, the most disenfranchised, adopt democracy, now that's a major intellectual achievement, isn't it? He said, okay, look at the bankrupt nature of these places you have left behind. We are going to clean it up, and we're going to use democracy to clean it up. In other words, we are saying to you, okay, we adopt your philosophical framework, we adopt your political framework, and we're going to clean up the place using two-party democracies. The Westminster model is what we all adopted to clean up this mess. All of us have parliaments, all of us has Robert Rules and all of the other Westminster type institutions. We've adopted them all and we're trying to clean up the mess and you don't want to be a part of it. So we say to you now, well, it's not fair. It's not right. You need to come back to the Caribbean and participate. I didn't say come back to dominate. Come back to participate in a conversation about schools and education. When the British government gave Jamaica its independence, Jamaica said, you're not helping us, we have to go alone. Independent, 1962. 80% of the people in Jamaica could not read or write. I mean, how can you colonize an island for 300 years? And after 300 years, 80% of the people can't read or write. I mean, is that a legacy that you are proud of? That you have just left mass illiteracy behind? 2 hospitals for 300,000 people? 2 hospitals for 300,000 people? Come on. So we are saying, no. We've been carrying this burden of development. Let me say this. The Caribbean people should be congratulated as heroes for converting your colonial mess into democracies, into stable societies, into stable where we can govern ourselves. And we should be congratulated for doing the impossible. Many people thought it could not be done. How can a bunch of illiterate people convert a colony into a democracy that is doing proud for its people? That was our achievement, and you need to come and help us. Now, the reason I say this is the other philosophical point, and this is where I think the Telegraph has not been kind to us. Telegraph has not been kind to us. But we understand why. But I'm just saying to you, the Telegraph has not been kind to us. What have we done in the Caribbean? Have we not created a world to invite all of the British people? Whenever you want to relax, you want to take your children on holiday, right? You want to have a family vacation. Did we not create an environment in the Caribbean where we welcome you, where you can walk the beaches, you can walk the streets, you can shop, you can enjoy the meals in the restaurant? Did we not create an environment for you, the British people, to come and relax, chill out, enjoy freedom? This is a free. Now, remember, it was based on slavery. Remember, you gave us slavery. You gave us slavery. And we, in turn, have taken your slavery and we have given you back freedom. We have converted your slavery into freedom. And we say to you, you brought us to the Caribbean in chains. That's what you did to us. Brought us to the Caribbean in chains. And what are you saying to you now? We're saying to you, no, come back to the Caribbean. We will host you. No change. You are absolutely free to walk the streets, enjoy your beaches, give your wife and your husbands a little vacation, let the kids go and play. That is the world we have created for Britain. And sections of the British media, rather than see the enormous hospitality of the Caribbean people, what you talk about is that we have come here to take money away from the taxpayers. That is the analysis that has come in the wake of what we have done. So what we are saying to you is this. You are a stakeholder of the Caribbean. The Caribbean, the English-speaking societies, built their economies around tourism, financial services, and all of the other institutions that require the imagination. Art, culture, and we've done that. You are also the beneficiaries of that because the Caribbean, you don't wake up in the morning and hear that the Caribbean people have declared Britain an enemy. No, we see you as a strategic partner and we move on beyond the slavery stuff. But at the same time, there is the practical issue of your legacy. And all we are asking you to do in this commission is to reflect upon this, return to the Caribbean as a partner to help us clean up the mess that you have created, so that going forward, all of us can enjoy the Caribbean even more so. We, the citizens, can eradicate illiteracy and the deep poverty, and we can do all of that with your support. And you, in turn, can have a Caribbean that going forward will be your ally. Because this is what my colleague is talking about. He's looking to the future. The world is changing. It is no longer the British Empire has fallen. The American Empire, well, we don't know how long it's going to last. But everyone now needs new friends and new allies to survive. You're not going to survive in the coming world without friends and allies and partners. And here's your predicament. When the Americans gave you the Marshall Plan to rescue you after the Nazi destruction, you and the Americans got together and said, oh, there is a special bond between Britain and the United States, a special bond. And there's a special relationship, and we hear about this in the United Nations and all the foreign policy. There's a special bond between the US and Britain. Where's your special bond with the Caribbean? And do you not want us to say that the Marshall Plan you enjoyed is what you owe to the Caribbean? The same Marshall Plan the Americans gave you, you must now give us, help us to rebuild the place and clean it up, so that we too can be saying in the years ahead, there's a special bond between Britain and the Caribbean. There's a special relationship. There's no space between us. If you interfere with Britain, you interfere with us, because we are now linked umbilically. That's what we want to have. That's what the Americans gave you, and what the Americans gave you, we want you to give us, so that we can all be on the same page going forward. You can have an ally in the future that you will need. There is no reason why Britain should be divided on reparatory justice for the Caribbean. There is no logical reason. It's an emotional response based on the racism of a few. And I believe that there's racism in the Western world. I don't believe the majority of British people have racist values. I don't believe it at all. I grew up here. I grew up in this country. I went to high school in this country. I went to university here, right? Yes, there were always a few racist people knocking around the place, but the majority of the people were open-minded liberal. And that is the consciousness that we want to respond to. That liberal, open spirit of the British people, that's what we're talking to. My brother, you can help us to communicate that message. Get off our backs and help us.
I don't write the opinion pieces.
Thank you very much, Professor Michaels. Now, I see some hands online. Could we take a question online and then we come back? Thank you. Timothy?
Yes, thanks, Dr. Brown. Edmund Hinkson, from the UK, I believe his hand is up. You can go ahead.
Sorry, he's
I
from
thank you.
somewhere?
This is office.
Oh,
Dear man, you know.
I thank you. First, can I confirm that you're hearing me?
Yeah.
We can hear you.
You're hearing.
Mr.
Okay,
Hickson,
Edmund
are you a
Hinkson.
member of the media?
No. So that's why. But I thank you for allowing me to intervene. So let me introduce myself. I am Edmund Hinkson. I'm a senior counsel in Barbados, and I am High Commissioner designate for Barbados to the United Kingdom. Hope to arrive by early next year. And I met with Ambassador Commission in terms of preparing for my role. David and I, as I tell everyone, are direct contemporaries from secondary school right through to law faculty, law school, and legal profession. And I take tremendous note of the first question by the British media, which was put to the panel, as to how can we expect that Britain, which it was said by the questioner, is going through economic troubles, can take up essentially taxpayers' British money to give to the West Indies. Now, Sir Hilary, you, in your response, you would have noted that perhaps what is taking place now ought to have taken place long time ago. I totally agree with you. I read recently that the majority of people in the United Kingdom are unaware of the historical connection between what was the British Empire and the wealth built up in the United Kingdom and by the wealth built up by British families and the exploitation by the United Kingdom of the West Indian former colonies, now independent countries, that there is no strategic education of British people, whether young or old, of the exploitation which was meted out to Barbados, Jamaica, and all the other Caribbean countries by the United Kingdom in the 200 years of of slavery, and then after that, in the
Mr. Hickson,
post-slavery.
Mr. Hickson, if you have a question to put to the media, please do so. Thank
Yes,
you.
but okay, but what I am asking is what
We
role?
are in a press conference, so you have to
Okay,
address the media.
yeah, right. What role can the media play in this, or would be willing to educate the British public as to exactly, Sir Hilary, what you spoke about and what Ambassador Commission spoke about, in terms of educating the British public of what is really and truly a moral duty of reparatory justice towards its former colonies in the Caribbean.
Thank you, Mr. Hinkson. Thank you for that, for raising those important issues and following on Professor Beckles. But we are taking questions. We're taking questions from the media, and we have a limited time in which to do so. So we will come back to you if we have additional time at the end. Thank you very much for participating. We had a question here in the room, please.
Thank you. My name is Paul Phoenix, with London Vibes. Well, in case anyone interested, you can get to us on www.londonvibes. That's vibes spelled VYBES.com. Two questions, Mary. Number one, education. How can we encourage this repertory initiative to support the issue of education, really education in the Caribbean? Particularly looking at the University College of the West Indies. Now, I know there are a lot of universities here who benefit from a loan system whereby people can apply to the universities. If they're accepted, then there is an agency in this country that will pay the university for their loans. Can we have that in the Caribbean? Is there any way we can transfer from a system here directly towards the Caribbean? Can we make that part of the whole repertory justice issue? And
can I deal with that question of education?
And one more. So one more. In 1962, the Ministry of Defense went to Barbados and they recruited 200 males from Barbados. And the reason for this, as we discovered lately, was because they went to Barbados because of the education system. So they recruited 200 able-bodied males to join them of a particular educational level. And we refer to it as a brain drain, because that 200 was the cream of the Barbados workforce. Not a lot has been said about that. In fact, nothing hardly has been said about it. Now, I contacted a lot of agencies involved in the Windrush. Nothing at all.
Sorry, could you ask your question, please?
Yes. Is the committee themselves, or would the committee be interested in finding out what is being done to benefit those 200 recruits that were taken from Barbados in 1962? I was one of them.
First of all, let us raise the question of education in the context of development, because that's what we are concerned about, the development of the Caribbean people, the Caribbean economies. As I said earlier, Britain exited the Caribbean according to the British High Commissioner in Jamaica in 1962. The British High Commissioner said, need to exit on the cheap. That was a letter he wrote from Kingston to Whitehall to say that we have to exit, but exit on the cheap. Now, we are in a situation where we have more or less solved the primary education issues. To roll out compulsory mandatory education for all of our young people has been significantly achieved at local cost, local expense. All of the governments in CARICOM have said we are providing education for all of our teenagers, primary to secondary. It is not ideal in any sense, but where the fundamental gap now exists is at the tertiary level. Okay. In the Caribbean, less than 12%. In fact, the figure is about 10%. About 10% of the young people in the Caribbean, and when I say young, we're using the UNESCO age cohort, 16 to 30. Less than 10% of that age group has access to post-secondary education. Not just university, but technical colleges, technical training, professional colleges, professional training. In Jamaica, the government announced recently that only 17% of the labor force has some kind of certification. Now, take the hemisphere in which we live, the Americas. The English-speaking Caribbean, has the lowest enrollment in post-secondary education in the whole hemisphere. From Alaska to Argentina, we have the lowest percentage of our young people accessing tertiary education. The Spanish Caribbean islands are way ahead. The French Caribbean islands are way ahead. The Dutch Caribbean speaking islands are way ahead. How is it, why is it therefore, why is it that in the Caribbean region, the Spanish speaking territories have a percentage that is close to North America? This is 40, 50%. The French-speaking islands, the Dutch-speaking islands, and in all of this, the English-speaking islands, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, the Leeward Islands, the Windward Islands, and we put in there the territories of Belize and Guyana. Why is it that the English has this legacy to deal with? Why is it the English are refusing to address this matter of partnership? Now, the sad thing about it is that all the economic models are showing there is no way you're going to build a modern, sustainable economy with less than 15% of your people educated at the post-secondary level. It's impossible. And what is holding back the Caribbean, even more so than a shortage of capital for investments, is the fact that we have the least formally educated, post-secondary educated population in the whole of the Americas. That is England's legacy. That is England's legacy. And the fact that Jamaica, with near 3 million people and resources one of the most beautiful islands in the whole world, and some of the most creative people in the world, just cannot get that economy off the ground because the population has not been given exposure to training. And that is what is holding back this major society. You put the resources in the best you can. You have limited resources, you have to invest in health, you have to invest in modernization, airports, seaports, infrastructure, agriculture, of course, and everywhere you find a situation. Now, the British need to reflect on their own journey. I was a student here, a Windrush teenager, when Britain transitioned from funding their educated people, their people with university education, when they transitioned to, if you want a university education, go and get a loan. But it was the timing of that was important. Britain made the transition from publicly funding their citizens to the citizens must go and find their own resources, get a loan, because the research showed, I was a student leader then, so we read the resources. They made the decision that Britain has reached a stage now where the population is well educated for the purpose of maintaining the British economy. That the colleges, the polytechnics, and all of these things had generated a profile of a labor force that was sustainable. And then Britain said, okay, now we can ask the citizens to pay something towards their education. But the timing was critical. And even though we were opposed to it, on principle, we recognized that it made sense to a certain degree. In the Caribbean, the governments cannot manage that. Jamaica, across the islands. So this is an area of reparatory justice. So when we speak about eradicating illiteracy, we ask the British government, you need to come and help us sort out this question of economic decline, producing more poverty, producing more illiteracy. These are things that we have to sit on the table and work out a partnership arrangement. This is not, my friend, an attempt to say to Britain to come to the Caribbean and educate the population. We're not asking for that. We're saying make a contribution towards a complex domestic issue in which you can facilitate. And it's not a question about aid, because there's a group of people in the country who believe that, oh, we give you aid, oh, we give you aid. Use the aid money to give us aid. The Caribbean governments have been asking all along for strategic partnerships. Strategic partnerships around development process. Say aid, well, here's $100, take it and go away. They're not asking for aid. We don't want you to throw money at us and say, go away. We want you to say, listen, this is a serious issue before us. You've created it. We're trying to deal with it. Help us deal with it. What input can you make in this conversation? So that's what we're here to talk about. And that's what we want to communicate to the British people, that this is about partnerships going forward. Meaningful dialogue, strategic partnerships, win-win scenarios. Win-win scenarios.
So, sorry, so what you're saying then is that we should take a stronger look, take an example at university education.
Well, we just, okay, you raised a very good question. Each year, the University of the West Indies graduates somewhere in the region of 15 to 20,000 graduates at multiple levels. Half of our graduates in the science and technology areas, mathematics, chemistry, physics, applied computer studies, all of those quantitative and technologically based disciplines that we need desperately. The Canadian government, the British government say, well, you want a job here, come. And our mathematics students, our engineering students, our students in biochemistry, computer technology, and so on, They go down to the British High Commission and they fill out a form, they go to the American Embassy, they fill out a form, and 6 weeks later. Now, why are they doing that? I don't think that our young science and technology graduates are disappearing because they want to. If we had industrial capacity to absorb them, they would stay. If we had the entrepreneurial investment in the areas of science and technology, especially now in the digital age, where they could get jobs and employment locally, they would stay. So here we are producing these brilliant young people. You know, David, I was at a function here last year, and a young man came up to me and he said, Vice Chancellor, do you recognize me? I said, no. He said, but you shook my hand at graduation. I said, oh, I'm happy. What are you doing now? First class honors in mathematics. Went down to the embassy, got a scholarship, came here to London University, did a master's in mathematics with distinction. Oxford gave him a scholarship. He went to Oxford, got a distinguished PhD in mathematical theory, and now he's here. And I said, are you going to come home? Are you going to come home? He said, but if I come home, I would have to teach. I want to do industry-based mathematical modeling. You know, I want to do industry-based mathematical models. So I'm going to stay here in England and work in the private sector. Boy, I wish we had a way to keep him, bring him back to help with industrial development. But that's the nature of it. So all of our genius young people in mathematics and the applied sciences are disappearing. So it's a complicated issue, okay? Yeah. So that's why we say these are things we need to sit down in a summit with the British government that has had effective leadership of this Caribbean region for some 300 years to sit and talk about these things.
So this in effect is a catch-22 situation. Yeah.
Okay, do we have any other questions from online?
Online.
Oh.
Dr. Brown, I believe Nadine White had a question, but I believe Nadine is in the room right now.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Apologies for my lateness. I got caught in traffic, but I was listening from the beginning of the session. So my name is Nadine White. I'm a journalist with Blackcurrant News and also director at Brixton Heights Media. I have two questions. The first question is about the barrel child phenomenon. I created a film called Barrel Child Phenomenon. So it refers to children.
Barrel child.
Barrel child.
Barrel child.
So
I want to talk about my own life. I was a barrel child for 10 years, and I don't want to talk about that.
sure. I mean, what I want to talk about is very much to do
Just tease them.
the fragmentation of Caribbean households and intergenerational trauma. So I released a film in 2023 called Barrel Children, the Families Windrush Left Behind, and it explores the experiences of the children born in the Caribbean while their parents migrated to the UK. This is something that's often not discussed in terms of the national conversation in the UK, but being that my father was one of the many children born in the Caribbean, I thought it'd be a good idea to shine a light on these experiences.
Any of my colleagues are barrel children? So I'm the only one.
Okay.
So let me give you my barrel child.
I mean, well, the question was basically about, just before we continue, given the history of migration, family separation, and the long-term social impact faced by barrel children and their parents, how is the reparations agenda taking into account intergenerational harms within this context? And you touched on what's known as brain drain as well, which is, talented, educated people leaving Caribbean and migrating overseas. So is the Commission considering the experiences of families fractured by post-war labour schemes as part of its work, and how might those histories be recognised or addressed in any future reparatory framework? That's the first question.
Okay, we have been following very, very closely the conversation around the Windrush generations and the positive aspects of that. They came here to, as I said, to clean up what Hitler had done in the cities and to the industries. There is a sense in which they were responding to a theory of Britain as a mother country. That was the propaganda that was disseminated across the Caribbean and in Africa, that there is a welcoming, nurturing culture that these people would find when they arrive here. The colonization legacy was so intense. And the best way I can share that with you is to give you an experience from George Lamond. Have you heard of George Lamond, the novelist, the great West Indian novelist from Barbados?
I've heard.
He arrived in the Windrush, and when he came off the boat in Plymouth and found his way up to London, he met on the streets of London a Barbados worker who had come to work on the railways. But he could hardly write. He was barely literate. So he wanted to write home to his mother, to let his mother know that he had arrived in England safely. And after 2 weeks, he had found somewhere to live and he has a job. And the letter went like this. And this is 1953. 1953, a young queen is coronated. So Britain is, all the coronation celebrations are all over Britain. Balloons everywhere and ribbons everywhere, young queen. And he writes home to his mom and he said, "There, mom, you'll be happy to know that I have arrived in England safely. And guess what, mom? They're celebrating the coronation here as well." Now you have to understand what that is saying. That Britain had left behind this notion in these islands that they were Britain. They were not far-flung islands somewhere, that they were part of Britain. The people were socialized to believe that they were British citizens and they were part of Britain, and that they were very surprised that the ones here were also celebrating the coronation. Because back home in Barbados and the Caribbean, it was everywhere. Our queen. We have a new queen, and we were celebrating. They arrived here and found, on the contrary, not your queen. You guys belong to the colonies, okay? You come, do your work and leave. Now, I will tell you the story of the children. When I arrived here, I was 12 years old. I had already been in high school for 3 years. I was in high school for 3 years. What we call in the Caribbean, the old grammar schools. So I arrived here, having spent 3 years in a Barbados grammar school. When the kids got here, there was no educational testing for the kids because they didn't want the kids to come here. They wanted the workers. They didn't want the responsibility of their children. And it was the same model during slavery. We wanted slaves to work, cut the canes. We didn't want the slaves to have children. And the women were punished. Slave women were punished for having babies. Okay? So they wanted manual labor. And 200 years later, the paradigm was the same. We wanted adult workers from the Caribbean to come here and work. We didn't want the children. So the parents came, did the work. My father came, my mother came, did the work, and we, the kids, were left behind. But of course, after a while, it was very difficult for these adults to be without their children. So one day, many years later, I said to my mother, I said, Mom, when you left Barbados, I was 3 years old. How could you have left your 3-year-old baby? And the next time you saw your baby, the baby was 12 years old. How could you have done that? And my mother said to me, it was very easy. You were an ugly baby. No, here's the thing. You ask a stupid question. You ask a stupid question, you get a stupid answer. Now, so we arrive here. What happened to my generation? They threw us in the ghetto schools. I was thrown into a technical school. 1 minute, I was in Barbados doing maths and history and Latin and Greek and literature and all the things we did in grammar school. And I was throwing it, and then next minute I'm doing woodwork and metalwork and pottery. What the hell? Every day it's woodwork and metalwork and pottery. And I was de-educated. I was de-educated.
You have to be a chippy.
De-educated. Thousands of children, thousands of Windrush children were de-educated on arrival here because we were thrown into the schools where there was no hope. Oh, grace of God. Now, two things could happen to you. You go mad, and many of my cohort became mentally ill. Many of my cohort became mentally ill as children. So when you see all of those statistics about the teenage kids and the boys in prison and fighting the police and being incarcerated, thousands of them, because they were so depressed. Now, you either go mad or you get an act of God. I had an act of God. I was playing cricket one day, and the headmaster of my school looked through the window and saw me playing cricket. And he sent for me. He said, "Who are you?" I said, just came from the Caribbean. "Where did you learn to play cricket like that?" I said, "Well, at home." He said, "But you have all the skills of a young professional cricketer." And we got talking. And he said to me, "By the way, what kind of education you had before you came here?" And I explained to him, he said, "But you don't belong in the school. You should not be here." And he did two things. And this is why we speak about racism and liberalism. This man took me out of the school, took me down to Warwickshire Cricket Clinic and told the Warwickshire County Cricket, "This young boy here has the talent to be a professional cricketer. You should bring him on as a youth player." Then he went to the Birmingham Town Council and said, "This young boy here is in the wrong school," and insisted that I be put in a proper school and put me back on track. Now, thousands, now that was an act of God. That was an act of God. That this elderly white man showed his consciousness and did justice for one child. Now, thousands were destroyed in the process. I saw boys who were in my school, in my class. When I looked around, they were gone. Prison. We saw it. Thousands were destroyed. Then there were the kids who went mentally ill, who found themselves walking the streets with nowhere to go. Picked up off the streets, they lost their mind with the oppression of the educational system. So we've heard the conversation, as you have said, about the adults of the Windrush. But the story of the Windrush children not be told. And you can imagine, like many Windrush families, there were three. In my family, there were three who were born in Barbados, and there were three who were born in England. So now the household has three West Indians and three English. West Indies are playing cricket. The West Indian children are supportive of Richards and Michael Holden. And my sisters who were born here are supporting Ian Botham. And they said, "Go on, England, beat them, beat them." And I'm saying, "Go on, West Indies, beat them." And right there in the TV room in our local house, we had an English faction and a West Indies faction. And these were realities that we had to reconcile. And many households actually went to war over that.
Yes.
Many households broke up because of these two generations of one local, one migrant, and they couldn't live together on the same roof. Many households disintegrated under that pressure. My father was very smart. He says, "Listen, he said, don't worry about it. If you go back 200 years, the average slave family, some of the people were from Ghana, some were from Nigeria, and all of us came from different tribes. So
That's an interesting.
the first black The first generation of Black households were made up of people from different tribes, but we had to learn to get along. So he gave us a historical way to look at that, and we did. And so I had 5 sisters, and each of my sisters became married to a guy from a different island. So now we have, when we had Christmas, it was like CARICOM. Jamaican brother-in-law, Grenadian brother-in-law, Guyana brother, and the point is, we have 2 different dimensions, but there needs to be a project in this country on why there was no policy to test the children. They just grabbed them and threw them in the worst city schools. Guess what? A few years ago, I went up to Birmingham to show my own children where I went to school. And when I got there, I saw a concrete structure. They demolished the school. It's not there anymore because the Birmingham City authorities deemed the school to be unfit. And they knocked it down. So I can't even go and see it anymore because they knocked it down because it was so terrible. Okay. But as I said, here's the theory. They discriminated racially against those children, destroyed those children. A whole generation, 2 generations were destroyed. Mental health, criminal incarceration, the consequences. But a few of us benefited from the spirit of goodwill that still exists in this country, right? And that is why we always approach this with a balanced mind. There's a spirit of goodwill in this country, but there's also a spirit that has come out of that slavery world that is still racist and toxic. So when we appeal, we believe that the majority of people in this country, when presented with the evidence and with a strategy, are prepared to sit and look at it. That's the assumption that has brought us here. If we thought it was a waste of our time, we wouldn't do it. So yes, I believe that those children will have justice. Because I'm sure that many of them today are still in mental homes.
So will the commission's reparations agenda take into account, or has it taken into account the intergenerational harm caused within this context?
Because we are faced with it in the Caribbean every day, not only here. Many of these Windrush people are returning to the Caribbean in need of mental health. Many of them have returned to the region in the last 10 to 15 years, and they need support and care because they were damaged by their journey here. So we have this huge project on both sides. The ones who are suffering with mental illness here and those who are still in prisons as a result of minor misdemeanors and find themselves 10, 15 years in a prison and so on. So we still have that. So yes, this is a matter we cannot ignore it. We will not ignore that.
To put the issue of intergenerational poverty into a broader context, you know, all of our ancestors were brought to the Caribbean across that Middle Passage in the bottom of the hold slave ship. They were deposited in those plantation societies and were located at the very bottom of a whole structure of oppression and exploitation. I often refer to our people as miracle people because having been deposited in those what I call locations of barbarism, and let's be very clear, I mean, those 17th century plantations in places like Barbados and Jamaica, Antigua, St. Kitts, those were the world's first concentration camps. Those were places of compressed terror. Our people, we managed to resist that very oppressive and dehumanizing experience through relentless opposition and resistance to enslavement. We managed to bring about the formal abolition of slavery. And we have converted through our effort We have converted those locations of barbarism into modern societies, nurturing, humane, civilized spaces. And I say we, because, you know, speaking about education, we had uprisings of our people in the 1930s right across the Caribbean, because for 100 years after the abolition of slavery, very little had improved for them under the then colonial leadership. To give you an example, in the decade, by the end of the decade of the 1930s, no more than 3 out of every 100 primary school children in Barbados went on to secondary education. So there was no access for them. 3 out of every 100, and Barbados was the best. That statistic was the best in the British West Indies. So in other countries, it might have been 2, you know. So to make the point, so that Hillary is making, our people had to, through an act of great will and discipline and effort, to take those societies from that very bottom level and make them relatively what they are today. You know, even with the weaknesses we have today, it is still a miraculous performance to bring us to where we are today. And some of our people, we have managed to extricate ourselves from that bottom rung of social deprivation and poverty. However, not all of us have been so fortunate. We do still have the phenomenon of families mired in intergenerational poverty. And that certainly is, as we structure our reparations demand, that is one of the factors that we are looking at. We say that our reparations claim is really based on addressing the historical legacies of underdevelopment. It's a very developmental approach. So our approach is not really about individual cash payments, but some of us do see that there could very well be a compelling case for some families that have been mired in intergenerational poverty for decades, for centuries really, that there could be a case for cash injections into those families.
And it's not the poverty that Britain would understand poverty. It's not the poverty that Britain would understand as poverty. This is sub-poverty.
Yes. Inhumane intergenerational poverty. So that is an aspect of our thinking about reparations. How do we address instances of families like that perhaps do need infusions of capital, of money, to help the family, you know, lift off and get on that journey that many other families have managed to accomplish.
And you know, I want to join with David in making this point. When we speak of poverty, we're not speaking of poverty in the way that British people would understand poverty. This is not British poverty. This is people living on the streets. This is people in houses without water. These are communities that are vulnerable at any moment to the outbreak of cholera. These are subhuman poverty. This is the depth of poverty that a 21st century should not abide by. But it's the poverty that was the norm under colonization. And 90% of the people under colonization were living like that. And now we have to bring them up to a human level. You know, just a human level. I mean, sometimes when I go around and I, as my duties to do, and I see the conditions under which people have to live. I mean, it's like Britain in the 15th century. It's like Monty Python talking about the Black Death in the 13th century. And, you know, people living in mud and sludge and no water, no internal toiletry facilities. It's an inhumane level that the people have been consigned to. And yes, with their own efforts, they have been able to half of them were able to pull themselves out of it, but
The principle of that reparations movement is that no one must be left behind. We, people like these fellas here, very well-heeled guys, you know, very wealthy guys.
One more.
But
one more,
but
you know.
not all of our people have been so fortunate. And one of the reparations principles maybe we all came across that middle passage in that condition, and we must leave no one behind. We must have a
This lady-
developmental equality
this
ethos.
lady asked about the barrel people. Do you know what a barrel person is? My parents came to this country. I was 3 years old when they left. Then I did what we used to call the common entrance, right? The common entrance to go to high school.
11.
Yeah. And I did my common entrance and got a scholarship to go off to school, high school. I received my first pair of shoes in my whole life when I was 10 years old. Because you could go to primary school barefooted. I don't say barefooted, with a close relationship to the road. An intimate relationship to the road. So we walked to school barefoot.
Ethan Sugar.
Right. And then I now have to go to high school. So my grandmother writes her a little letter and said, "Dear so-and-so, you'll be happy to know that your son is going to high school and he will need a pair of shoes." And the barrel arrived. And when the barrel arrived, my first pair of shoes, there were 2 left foot shoes. I want you to understand the psychology of a barrel. And I'm so excited to see my little black, shiny, brown shoes that I'm supposed to wear to school. And when I looked at them, I realized when I put them on, there were 2 left foot. So what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Another barrel would take a month. I have to go to high school next week. So I had to wear to school my 2 left foot shoe. So what I would do, I would walk to the school with the shoe over my shoulder. And when I got to the school gate, I put them on. And every opportunity I took. But guess what? But it was too late. My first classmates gave me a nickname. Charlie Chaplin. Just walk like Charlie Chaplin. You know Charlie Chaplin? No, that is barrel. That's the depth of the barrel, the humiliation of the barrel children. I can give you 100 stories about the barrel babies, right? Anyway, I believe.
All right.
Thank you, and I was just we're taking the film to Barbados next week. I think it would be good to have a
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're moving towards closing off now. So we have our two final questions. Take one here.
Hi, I do apologize once again, Dr. Eric, how are you? David and Dr. Beckles. I was in Geneva last week. Sorry, my
What's
name.
your name
I beg your
and your organization?
I'm June Lewis and I'm representing the International Decade for People of African Descent. I'm one of the co-chairs and also for the Global African Congress on the Council of Elders. So Eric, I've seen you since Berlin.
Yep.
Yeah. And David since last year, so hi. Sorry for the delay, everybody, apologies. The joys of London traffic, that's what I'm going to say to you. I wanted to go back because I'm from Liverpool and I turned 70 this year. And what you were saying about the institutional education and things like that, I can remember the boys I grew up with and how they disappeared. And what you're saying, it was a pipeline, yes, to the mental health, but it was a pipeline to the Merchant Navy and the Army, because they were cannon fodder. If I was honest, you know what I mean? They come out and they just needed bodies at the time. If you look at it, you know, and these boys would come out of the school, right as heck, if they'd have been tested, like you said, they'd have been autistic, but on the high chart. They weren't stupid, but you know, it was just that class distinction. So I'd like you to put that down as well, not just the mental health. Look at the ones that actually worked. Went to factories, and Liverpool at the time had a lot of jobs.
One of my classmates was encouraged by the school to join the army, which he did. He was sent to Singapore, 6 months of training to Singapore. And then he was transferred into the battlefield of Northern Ireland. There he lost both of his legs. He's now in Birmingham, living in a home. Because he has no legs. Lost both legs and a bone after 2 weeks in Ireland.
Let that be your test case.
And without legs.
Let that be your test case, because my question is, the boys worked.
Yeah.
So where's their pension? Sit in some bank account. Could you put that, that was one of the things we were talking about. That's lost income. It's not lost, it's just sitting in a bank account, because as you say, those that had the mental health issues is this, but those that worked, and they came back, and some of them ended up on the streets because they were so traumatized. When they come back, there was no infrastructure for them to go to, they lost families, and as you say, where's he? And some of them, they returned home after 10 years, and the family saying, where have you been? And they didn't know where they'd been because they're so traumatized, other than they'd been merchant navy or the army. But I'm saying that I would call them cannon fodder, but it's a bit rude, but you know what I mean, straight.
Is that your question? That's your question.
Yeah, so the question, please include them. Not just the mental health, where they went into the mental health, the special education schools. I can name the schools that, did it, and the reasons it was done. It was because the boys were too intelligent for the teachers. Those that come straight from the Caribbean knew their maths better than the teachers that were teaching them. So I would like that classification to be recognised as much as the ones that were suffering from the mental health. That was just a classification that, the pale skins gave them. But the boys, and I can remember, they were really bright, really bright.
It was a horrendous time.
Yeah.
I remember class in urban geography, and one of my first classes, and I was asked if I could draw a map of Great Britain. I tell you, I think so. But that's an issue of colonization. I could draw a map of Great Britain, but I could not draw a map of Jamaica.
Yeah.
I could not draw a map of Trinidad, and I was educated in Barbados, but I could draw a map of Great Britain. And he said, what else can you do? And I put in all the rivers, all the mountains, all the cities, all the towns, everything about the British environment. I knew nothing about the rest of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And when this teacher realized that I could do that, well, I became enemy number one. You would have thought that he would have said, well, the fellow knows a bit of geography. No, no, no. How dare you embarrass your classmates like that?
Hillary,
We have our last question over here.
Yes, if I may, my name's Ade Shalanka. I'm a writer, not so much a journalist, although I have been, but more in theatre and film. And one of my projects was about, it's an ongoing project, one of my first plays was about the Nigerian diaspora in this country. And I grew up in Ladbroke Grove, Notting Hill, in Carnival country. That was my whole experience. So most of my environment was mainly Caribbean, although I'm Nigerian ancestry. And it wasn't until I got to my 20s, all of my friends at school were either white British, from the Caribbean. There wasn't much of a Nigerian community. But it wasn't until I became, I suppose, more involved in the media in my 20s that I realised that that fracture that you talked about in terms of the different Caribbean nations was also a fracture, obviously, between Africa and the Caribbean. And it was an interesting experience for me to be working in African newspapers and at the same time writing for Black British newspapers and seeing there wasn't much exchange, communication, conversation, although we lived our lives together. In that space, there wasn't really that much integration, is really what I'm talking about. So in terms of the fractured, healing that fractured family, what's the repertory program within your plan?
In terms of the media?
No, in terms of the African-Caribbean relationship.
The frontier, you want to look at it. That's the core of it right now.
Well, we just had the second Africa CARICOM Heads of Government Summit in Ethiopia on the 7th of September of this year. And one of the big outcomes of that summit is the joint declaration on reparations, the joint African Union CARICOM declaration on reparations. I mean, even before that summit, one of the prominent features of the CARICOM 10-point plan has been that reconnection with our African homeland, with our African culture, cultural rehabilitation. Part of one of the programs that we are seeking funding for within the CARICOM 10-point plan is programs designed to give our people that reconnection with their ancestral homeland. Programs to develop the museums and the cultural institutions that will help us with that cultural reconnection and recovery. So that was in the CARICOM plan since 2014, but it is now being taken to a higher level with the new partnership between CARICOM and the African Union. So we have decided that we are coming together in a partnership in many areas, but more specifically in reparations. And we're going to, the African Union will develop, just as we have the 10-point plan, they will develop the African Common Position on Reparations. Just as we have the CARICOM Reparations Commission, they will develop their committee of experts on reparations. And then we are going to establish a joint Africa CARICOM reparations mechanism that brings the two structures together. So many of our reparations goals we will be pursuing in collaboration with the continent of Africa. And even something like, one of our major demands is for repatriation. We have many of our, especially our Rastafari brethren and sistren, are intent on that physical repatriation to the African continent. And this is something, of course, we would need the participation and involvement of African governments and countries in making that a reality. Because while we expect the European countries that organized and orchestrated the trade in enslaved Africans and are responsible for making that fracture, we expect that they will provide funding for repatriation programs. But for those programs to work, you're also going to have the countries, the governments on both sides of the Atlantic, in the Caribbean and on the African continent, collaborating with each other, being part of such a program. So to answer your question, this is a big part of the reparations. The reparations is about healing. It's about repairing the damage. Part of the damage was that separation. So it is about reconnecting and cultural reclamation. And we are inviting the government of those countries that were initially responsible for creating that fracture. We're inviting them to be part of that process of reconnection and healing. And we want to make it plain, we are not simply targeting the UK. This is an overarching principle that we have. Any entity that was implicated either in the genocide of the native people in the Caribbean or in African enslavement, we expect to play a role in helping to repair some of the damage that they're responsible for. So in 2016, the CARICOM wrote not only to the head of government of the United Kingdom, we also wrote to the heads of government of Spain, Portugal, France, Holland, and the Netherlands. The same claim we have made against the UK, we have made against all of those other governments, because it's a principle. It is not a selective targeting of the UK, no. whoever was involved, we expect you to come to the table, to sit with us, to discuss with us what role you can play. And we can agree, we need to agree upon it in helping to repair the damage. And since 2016, our research has identified 4 other European countries to add to that list. So it's going to be 10 countries that we are approaching. I'm not going to call the names of those 4 because we haven't yet written to them. And we are preparing letters to write to them. You know, so I want to be very clear, you know. This is a booklet I produced this year. What to the Republic of Barbados does the 14th of May, 1625 mean? This year is the 400th anniversary of the British colonization of Barbados. They first came on the 14th of May, 1625. They returned 2 years later in 1627. They brought with them 10 enslaved Africans. And that 1627 landing with 10 enslaved Africans was the beginning of slavery in Barbados. At that time, slavery did not exist in England. Slavery had been abolished in England. But these Englishmen who established this wonderfully successful and profitable sugar plantation economy needed a massive amount of labor. And they turned their eyes to Africa and they enslaved these Africans and they brought them to Barbados, these Englishmen, many of whom went on to become the billionaires of the 17th century because this slave plantation enterprise was so profitable. And you know, because we are talking about reparations, and it's important that we emphasize that this claim for reparations is anchored in a terrible crime against humanity that was perpetrated against our people. And if I may, in tribute to this 400th year that we are commemorating in Barbados, if I may, just to bring home the point, because sometimes, you know, we get lost as to what is the essence of this thing we are talking about. If I may just quote the 1688 Act for the Governing of Negroes that was passed, enacted by the colonial white planter House of Assembly in Barbados, a House of Assembly of Englishmen. This is what they say. Whereas the plantations and estates of this island cannot be fully managed and brought into use without the labor and service of great numbers of Negroes and other slaves. And for as much as the said Negroes and other slaves brought unto the people of this island for that purpose are of barbarous, wild, and savage natures, and such renders them wholly unqualified to be governed by the laws, customs, and practices of our nations. That is the laws of England. It therefore becomes absolutely necessary that such other constitutions, laws, and orders should be in this island framed and enacted for the good regulating and ordering of them, as may restrain the disorders, rapes, and inhumanities to which they are naturally prone and inclined. I want that to sink in. In this 400th anniversary year of the British colonization and the commencement of slavery in Barbados. So let that sink in. What they said here is, we are entitled to ignore the Constitution of England. We are entitled to ignore all of the national law of England, because the Constitution of England and the law of England is designed to be applied to human beings. These Africans, we say, are not human beings. They are wild, savage, and barbarous creatures who are naturally inclined to disorders, rapes, and inhumanities. And we are therefore at liberty to design a totally new legal system of slave law that entitles us to enslave them, to mutilate them, to whip them, to brand them with hot irons, and to work them to death, because we have determined that they are not human. So that, at the heart of all that we are saying, is that crime against humanity. And that must never be forgotten. All of this inequity and injustice and inequality that we are saying now needs to be addressed and repaired is because of that foundational crime. That foundational crime against humanity. And it's the quintessential crime against humanity, because at the core of it is a denial of the humanity of African people. And all we are saying is the negative consequences of that original sin, that original sin, we have to come together to address. You know, we have a saying in the Caribbean: it takes two hands to clap. We have to come together.
Say in Nigeria, one hand.
We have to wrap up now. Thank you all.
Come together and clap.
On that very poignant note and very important historical account, I want to thank you all. I'm sure you would like me to thank Professor Sir Hilary Beckles and Ambassador Commission for the very candid way they have engaged, the very personal stories that they have shared, the clarity that they have brought to the mission of the CARICOM Reparations Commission and what we are here doing this week. I want to thank you all. I want to especially thank our hosts, the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, Professor Kingsley Abbott and his team. They're here, Leslie, Megan, is this Shaman? Jane. Jane, okay. Thank you all so much. You have been wonderful hosts, and thank you to the media for coming and being part of the partnership, which I think has been so clearly expressed in this press conference, the nature of the partnership that the CARICOM Reparations Commission is seeking with the media, with the government and people of the United Kingdom. I thank you all, and thank you all online.